May 26, 1942. Northrop Field, Hawthorne, California. A freelance test pilot named Vance Breese straps himself into the cockpit of the largest fighter aircraft ever built for the United States Army Air Corps. It has a 66-foot wingspan. It weighs nearly 30,000 pounds loaded. It carries four 20mm cannons in its belly and a remote-controlled turret on its back. In its nose sits a classified secret that most of the men working on the program are not cleared to discuss. Breeze pushes the throttles forward. The two Pratt and Whitney double Wasp engines pull the machine into the California sky. He lands 40 minutes later, climbs down, and tells Jack Northrop that it flies beautifully. He calls it an old man's airplane. Inside the Pentagon, the aircraft is already controversial. Generals call it too big. They call it too slow. They call it too late. General Hap Arnold, looking at the drawings, asks who is responsible for this assortment of built-in headwinds. General Hoyt Vandenberg predicts that little success can be expected. Some commanders ask formally for British Mosquitoes instead. The program is mocked, distrusted, and nearly canceled. They were all wrong. The rejected airplane they were trying to replace would go on to become the first production fighter in history, built from the ground up around a radar set. It would invent the doctrine that every modern radar-equipped fighter in the world still follows. This is the story of the Northrop P-61 Black Widow. To understand why the Black Widow mattered, you have to understand what the United States was using before it. The answer is embarrassing. In 1940, the Army Air Corps had no night fighter at all. None. When German bombers were battering British cities during the Blitz, American planners watched with alarm. They had nothing that could do what the Royal Air Force was beginning to do, which was hunt enemy aircraft in complete darkness using airborne radar. The stopgap was the Douglas P-70 Nighthawk. It was not a night fighter. It was a Douglas A-20 attack bomber with a radar strapped to its nose and four 20mm cannons bolted into its belly. It used a primitive Skrar 540 radar that struggled with ground clutter and rarely detected anything beyond 4,000 yards. Its service ceiling was 25,000 feet on a good day. It took nearly 45 minutes to climb to 20,000 feet. And in the Pacific, the Japanese learned very quickly to fly their Mitsubishi Betty bombers above 30,000 feet, where the P-70 simply could not reach them. The numbers told a brutal story. In the entire Pacific War, the Douglas P-70 shot down exactly 2 enemy aircraft. 2. After years of operation, across multiple squadrons, on every major island campaign, the improvised American night fighter managed 2 confirmed kills. In the Mediterranean, the situation was no better. American squadrons were given worn-out Bristol Beaufighters by the Royal Air Force as a reverse lend-lease. The 417th Night Fighter Squadron lost 9 Beaufighters to technical failures alone in less than 3 months. Major Arden Cowgill, commanding the 414th Night Fighter Squadron, filed an official assessment that said the aircraft was far below American standards. On October 21, 1940, Colonel Lawrence Craigie of the Air Technical Service Command called a Northrop engineer named Vladimir Pavleka into a room at Wright Field. He told him not to take notes. He described, in the vaguest possible terms, a device that could locate enemy aircraft in the dark. He asked whether Northrop could build an airplane to carry it. The mission was to intercept and destroy hostile aircraft in darkness or under conditions of poor visibility. Pavleka flew overnight to Los Angeles. Within 1 week, Jack Northrop had a proposal on Craigie's desk. The contract came on January 10, 1941. 2 prototypes. Maximum cost $1,367,000. Northrop hired 125 engineers specifically for the project. The design was radical. Twin booms running back from the engines to a connecting tailplane. A central nacelle housing 3 crew members. Tricycle landing gear, which was still considered advanced in 1941. Full-span retractable flaps designed by an engineer named Edward Zaparka. And in the nose, a large fiberglass radome housing the most secret piece of electronics in the American arsenal. That radome held the Skrar 720. The radar had been developed at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Radiation Laboratory and built by Western Electric. It used a cavity magnetron, a British invention handed to the Americans by the Tizard mission in September 1940. It operated at 3.3 gigahertz. It produced 70 kilowatts of peak power. It could detect a bomber at 5 miles, and under good conditions, considerably farther. It had a 29-inch rotating dish. It weighed over 400 pounds. And it would be operated by a dedicated third crewman, a radar operator, seated in an isolated compartment at the back of the gondola. The armament was built around the mission. 4 20mm Hispano cannons were clustered in the belly, 200 rounds per gun. The belly mounting was deliberate. It meant the muzzle flash never reached the pilot's eyes. In a night fight, your night vision is everything, and firing cannons mounted in the nose or the wings would blind a pilot for critical seconds. Above the fuselage, a General Electric remote-controlled turret carried 450 caliber Browning machine guns. It was the same turret type used on the B-29 Superfortress. The first flight went well. Then the problems began. The turret caused severe tail buffeting whenever it rotated more than 30 degrees off centerline. Engineers began deleting it from production aircraft. Weight climbed from a design target of 22,600 pounds to nearly 30,000. The plexiglass rear cone imploded during dives. On a desert test flight in Arizona, at 110 degrees Fahrenheit, the nose radome melted. Longitudinal instability grounded the prototype for redesign. Promised delivery dates slipped by months. By the time the first production P-61s rolled out of the Hawthorne factory in late 1943, the program had been under critical assessment for 3 years. The loudest critic was General Hoyt Vandenberg, commanding the 9th Air Force. One assessment he authorized concluded flatly that little success could be expected. General Carl Spaatz formally requested that the Black Widow be replaced with British Mosquitoes. The request was denied only because there were not enough Mosquitoes to go around. The full specifications were these: 2 Pratt and Whitney R-2865W engines, 2,000 horsepower each, 2,250 with water injection. Maximum speed 366 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Service ceiling 33,100 feet. Combat range 610 miles. Rate of climb 2,540 feet per minute. Compared to a Mosquito Mark 17 at 20,000 feet, the numbers were comparable. Compared to a Douglas P-70 at any altitude, they were not. The Black Widow's secret weapon was not any single feature. It was the philosophy behind every feature. Every aircraft before it had been a conversion. The P-70 was a bomber with a radar. The Beaufighter was a torpedo aircraft with a radar. The German Junkers 88 night fighters were day bombers with antenna arrays bolted on, and those antennas cost them up to 25 miles per hour in speed. The Black Widow was different. It was designed from a blank sheet of paper with one question at the center of the drawing board. What shape does an airplane need to be to hunt using a radar? The answer shaped everything. The nose had to be large enough for a rotating dish antenna, so the gondola extended forward. The radar operator needed isolation from cockpit light, so he was given his own compartment at the rear of the nacelle. The pilot's night vision had to be protected, so the guns moved to the belly. The workload of flying, navigating, searching, and shooting was too much for one man, so the crew was 3. The interception profile required stability during long, slow stalking chases, so the wing was enormous. Every answer came from the mission, and the mission came from the radar. This was the invention of what engineers now call the weapon system concept, the idea that an aircraft is designed around its sensor, not the other way around. The F-14 Tomcat was built around the AWG-9 radar. The F-15 Eagle was built around the AG-63. The F-22 Raptor was built around the AG-77. Every one of them is a direct descendant of the philosophy Northrop established in Hawthorne in 1941. Radar operator Bob Orzel of the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron later recalled how secret the whole business was. He said it was very hush-hush, and that it was not until basic radar ground school that the operators began to get any real inkling of what they would be doing. If you are finding this interesting, subscribing takes a second and helps the channel. The Black Widow's first combat kill came on the night of June 30, 1944, over Saipan. Second Lieutenant Dale Haberman and Flight Officer Raymond Mooney of the 6th Night Fighter Squadron were vectored by ground control onto an inbound Mitsubishi G4 M-Betty bomber. Their aircraft, a P-61A, was named Moonhappy, a combination of Haberman's nickname Hap and Mooney's surname. Haberman let the Betty pass overhead, then executed a hard 180-degree turn and climbed to 17,000 feet. At 700 feet range, he opened fire with the 4 belly cannons. The Betty burst into flame and fell into the Pacific. Over the next 6 months, the 6th Night Fighter Squadron would score 16 confirmed kills. The 418th would score 18 and produce the highest-scoring American night fighter ace of the war, Major Carroll Smith. On the night of December 29, 1944, over Mindoro in the Philippines, Smith and his radar operator Lieutenant Philip Porter shot down 4 Japanese aircraft in a single night. No American night fighter crew had ever done that before. Smith had initially been unimpressed. He later admitted that he had thought she was too big and clumsy to be a fighter. In Europe, the story was similar. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, based at Maupertus in Normandy and later at Florennes in Belgium, became the most successful American night fighter unit of the war. On the night of December 26, 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, they shot down 5 German aircraft in a single night. First Lieutenant Paul Smith and his radar operator Lieutenant Robert Tierney accounted for 2 Junkers, 188s, and became the first American night fighter aces of the Second World War. Smith described his kill with the flat precision of a man who had already repeated the story many times. He fired a short burst at 300 feet. The first round struck the fuselage. The second burst hit the right engine. The right wing broke off outboard of the engine. Lieutenant Hermann Ernst of the same squadron had started his career by shooting down a V-1 flying bomb over the English Channel on July 16, 1944. Ernst and his radar operator Eddie Kopsel flew a P-61 they had named Borrowed Time, because both men had already been the sole survivors of previous aircraft accidents. On the night of March 1, 1945, Ernst and Kopsel shot down 2 Junkers 87 Stukas and a Messerschmitt 110 in a single sortie. One assessment by the Gathering of Eagles Foundation called their record unexcelled by any American night fighter crew in Europe. During the Battle of the Bulge, when freezing rain and low cloud grounded every Allied day fighter in Northern Europe, the radar-equipped P-61 was the only all-weather fighter available to the 9th Air Force. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron had barely 5 airworthy aircraft. In 6 months of combat, they had received exactly 1 replacement. The implications were stark. The most advanced night fighter in the American arsenal was being held together with spare parts scavenged from damaged aircraft, and it was still flying every night the Germans could not be stopped any other way. Total confirmed P-61 kills across every theater came to approximately 127 enemy aircraft, plus between 9 and 18 V-1 flying bombs. Most P-61 losses were non-combat, accidents in weather, and mechanical failure. The kill-to-loss ratio in direct air-to-air combat exceeded 10 to 1. The comparison with the Mosquito never goes away, and it has to be addressed honestly. The de Havilland Mosquito was beautiful. It was famous. It was fast. The later Mosquito Night Fighter Mark 30 could reach 424 miles per hour, which was 58 miles per hour faster than a P-61B at comparable altitude. Royal Air Force crews loved it. British civilians cheered it. The glamour of the Mosquito is not in dispute. None of that mattered when the question was what the aircraft could actually do in the darkness. The Mosquito was a 2-seat aircraft. The pilot had to fly, navigate, monitor the radar scope, and shoot. The P-61 had a dedicated radar operator whose entire job was managing the intercept geometry. On a long stalking approach through cloud, that division of labor was decisive. The Mosquito carried 4 20mm cannons. The P-61 carried 4 20mm cannons, plus 4 50-caliber machine guns in a remote turret. The Mosquito's radar was the SCAR 720. The P-61's radar was also the SCAR 720. The difference was how each aircraft was built around it. On July 5, 1944, the Army Air Forces staged a direct fly-off at Royal Air Force Hearn between a P-61A and a Mosquito Night Fighter Mark 17. The American report concluded that the P-61 proved faster at all altitudes, outturned the Mosquito at every altitude by a large margin, and far surpassed it in rate of climb. Decades later, Smithsonian researcher Dana Bell found evidence in the National Archives suggesting the fly-off had been rigged in favor of the American aircraft. Colonel Winston Kratz, who organized it, later said he was absolutely sure the British had been lying like troopers to avoid giving up Mosquitoes. The truth is probably somewhere in between. But the larger point stands. Against a Japanese Betty at 20,000 feet, against a Junkers 188 over the Ardennes, against a V-1 Buzz bomb over Kent, the P-61 did not need to be faster than a Mosquito. It needed to be faster than its target. And it was. The Black Widow served until 1950. The last American combat P-61 was retired at Tachikawa Air Base in Japan in May of that year, just weeks before the Korean War began. 706 were built in total at the Northrop plant in Hawthorne, California. 4 survive today. One is at the National Air and Space Museum in Chantilly, Virginia. One is at the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson. One sits in the Beijing Air and Space Museum in China, captured by communist forces at the end of the war. The fourth, recovered in pieces from Mount Cyclops in New Guinea in 1991, is being restored to flying condition at the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum in Pennsylvania. The myth that will not die is that the P-61 was too slow to be effective. It is a stubborn claim, and it is wrong. The P-61 was too slow to catch a Messerschmitt 262 jet, which is also true of every piston engine fighter ever built. Against the aircraft it was actually designed to hunt. It had the speed, the climb, the firepower, and the radar to find them in absolute darkness and destroy them. The numbers confirm it. 127 manned aircraft, a kill-to-loss ratio above 10-1, 2 confirmed kills by the airplane it replaced. The generals were wrong. Arnold was wrong about the built-in headwinds. Vandenberg was wrong about little success being expected. The men who wanted Mosquitoes instead were wrong. The Black Widow was not a compromise, and it was not a failure. It was the first aircraft in history built from the radar outward, and every fighter the United States has flown since has been built the same way. Not the fastest, not the most famous, but the one that showed an entire century of fighter designers what a radar hunter was supposed to look like.